Hey everybody, it's Lindsay here from Oceans and Rivers, and I'm here with our friend Sam Reynolds from Unlock Astrology so that we can give you an overview of what is in store for this Aquarius season. Lots to talk about today as we look at what is going on with Aquarius, what Aquarius awakens for us in our psyche, and also what flower essences and earth medicine are going to support us in really making those at making this aspect of our psyche work for us. So, hey, Sam.
What's going on, Lindsay?
So, how should we jump into this? I know that we found this really beautiful quote that is really inspiring to me by a Aquarian. And the quote says, "I'm going to stay out here on the margins and let the center look for me."
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's a beautiful launch pad for us to start talking about Aquarius and also the polarity with Leo.
Yeah, and we should say who that is. That is the inestimable Toni Morrison, who we lost last year. And she actually taught me a lot about Aquarius. I mean, I got to study with her for a semester. And among the things that I take from that quote and understand is that the ruler for Leo is the sun. So the sun stands in the center of our solar system. And so the sun is really like the center, and Leo, by virtue of being ruled by the sun, relates to that centrality. Whereas in the ancient world, we had Saturn as the exclusive ruler of Aquarius. And so that was at the outer reaches of what we knew at one point of not so much our solar system as much as the kind of visible galaxy.
It's the farthest planet away.
It was the farthest planet before we discovered more of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and so on. And so with Saturn being there and ruling Aquarius, we could say Aquarius almost symbolizes that moment of being more on the margins, being on the periphery. How we also, by virtue of dealing with those on the perimeter, when we're talking about those particular people, right, or even some dimensions of ourselves, how they also maintain their level of integrity in relation to the center, being distant from the center. So one way to think about this is that we have the actor on stage being the center of attention. We have the audience looking and going like, okay, this is great, or like, this is booty, whatever. Right. So Aquarius might be more like that audience being, on the perimeter. And that's why I think people also attach this particular mythos or narrative with Aquarians, that they're just remote, distant, just observers.
I think this came up in Leo cycle because I'm dating an Aquarian.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a water sign, so I'm hyper emotional. Everything is about feeling. And I noticed his ability to kind of be detached or to have the observer's eye at what's happening and not necessarily get drowned into it, but to just have that perspective of like, what's the bigger picture around, what's the bigger picture around what is central for you.
Right. And the one thing I say too is like when people talk about that detachment with Aquarius, one of the things they say is like, it's not detachment, it's just not the same excitement about your reindeer games. It's just like, I'm not getting involved in that. I don't care. Right. And just think about it. Those people who get into those elaborate explanations, and then Susie, she came to the door, and then she did this, and blah, blah, blah. And then Bob came, and then, and Aquarius is just like, okay, so what's happening here? And so people go like, well, you're just so nonplussed.
Literally, like some of our conversations, it's literally like, and then, and he'll be like,
okay. And for people, it reads like, oh, you're detached. And it's just like, what's this got to do with the bigger picture of your life, though? Or like life, period. There is this way in which they relate to what happens on the margins, both in terms of interpersonal contact and also in societal sense, and being attentive to that. So they're not necessarily going to position themselves and their emotions or your emotions in the center as much as trying to figure out well, what is going on? What is the bigger picture?
So this idea of what's happening on the periphery, and we can relate that to society, certainly. This idea of like, who are the marginalized? And I think what Toni Morrison is talking about in this quote, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but what really resonates to me is that there's this place of saying that, like, I'm not, you know, as a woman, as a Black woman, gonna always try to come to the mainstream, but I'm gonna stay in my integrity and let that be a place of new centrality. I'm going to allow what is relevant and important and potent in my culture and in my experience to form a new center that doesn't have to conform to what might be considered the mainstream or what might be.
Yeah, that's spot on. And just to flesh it out and give it more rounded context, as I understood it from listening to her and reading her work, you know, she was a very well-educated, well-steeped in the American canon, literary canon. And one thing that she was very attentive to was how, in reading the works of William Faulkner or Ernest Hemingway, how Black people were more on the margins of those texts. Yeah. And so her focus with her books were to take those people that we only saw in passing and make them center figures, centerpieces, and to kind of like look at the world from their point of view rather than just being seen from someone else's point of view. So I think that also really is tantamount to the Aquarian project.
I can sometimes be sensitive to like, okay, well, are people going to get this if they're not coming from a young Black urban perspective? And how do I navigate that? Or how do I just stand in and say, well, this is what it is, you know?
And that's the dynamic of Leo and Aquarius right there. You know, Leo is like, whatever, you know, I'm just going to do me. And you figure it out. Whereas Aquarius might go too far and be like, well, what about these people? What about this? You know, and then how do I navigate that in relation to me and my desires? You know, so sometimes the pendulum can swing in weird ways between the two.
And that, I think, is another big piece of Aquarius that I often hear is idealism or this kind of humanitarian vision or quest, or even extra humanitarian. Like, you know, a lot of times Aquarius is associated with like other worlds and, you know, aliens, stuff like that. You know, especially as we're talking about the margins and how do we include the people on the periphery, it makes me think of the freedom fighter or the revolutionary. And I know that when we started this conversation last cycle, you kind of were like, that's not really it. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, the mythology of the revolutionary, why it gets associated with Aquarius, but what is it really actually speaking?
Well, so the popular narrative is to talk about Aquarius as the revolutionary, as the freedom fighter. And I see some slice of that, but I see it a different way. And where it's informed is by the modern association of Aquarius with Uranus. And so Uranus has become known as the planet that deals with, you know, counterculture, revolutionary, being unusual. And I think that is true. When I say I think that's true, I can see those things about about Uranus. What's fascinating about Uranus, even astronomically, most, if not all the planets in our solar system rotate on a north-south axis. Uranus is the only planet in our solar system that rotates on the east-west axis, like it rotates on its side. It's unusual, even in its actual astronomy. It's in the astrological sense, because it was discovered, I believe, in 1789, it's come with these associations, or around that time, these associations with the revolutions that occurred, whether we're talking about the revolution, the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, or the French Revolution. So it's come to be associated with being revolutionary. And when the association in the 20th century was made between Uranus and Aquarius, I think that cemented the idea for Aquarius. So when we list the Aquarians, right, Rosa Parks, and we have Toni Morrison, we also have Angela Davis, There's some question. We don't really know the birth date for Frederick Douglass, but he's often associated with being Aquarian.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Marley as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when you listen to that list, do we hear somewhat more revolutionaries or innovators or trailblazers in a particular way? I just think that whole idea of them as revolutionary has kind of been overblown because of the association with Uranus.
What you're saying really ties back to where we started about the margins in the center, because it sounds like from what you're describing that the Aquarius energy is not so much about on the ground physical change, which would be more Earth Taurus makes sense, but more about the changing the perspective.
Yes.
And changing what we're looking at, what we're seeing, the lens through which we look at something. And when that shifts, then we get all these other changes that follow suit. So this idea of, I'm still going to hold to our, partially because I'm wearing fatigues, especially just for this call, but also I'm going to hold to this idea of associating the rebel freedom fighter with Aquarius from the perspective of just saying that rebel or freedom fighter is saying that this marginalized population, community, society needs access and has the birthright to the access that is, I guess, caught from the Capricorn diamond.
Right. Because the diamond is multifaceted, right? So it's kind of like looking through it. It's looking at, taking the diamond and seeing the multifacetedness of the cosmos around you.
Yes.
And coming to look at that perspective.
From a flower essence perspective, we're going to be working with a flower essence which is called Stand. It used to be called Get Up, Stand Up. It was one of the first of the elementals to be created. And I made it right after the current president was elected.
Mm-hmm.
And part of yeah, I mean, and here we are, like full circle. You can't make this stuff up. But the reason I made it was because I remember how, there were a lot of memes going around, like, America just went back 300 years and, all those things. But what I remember was that there was so much despondency and so many people who were just kind of like, not just because of Trump, but just because of all of the assaults that America has made on its people at the margins, and at a certain point, you're just like, come on, like, again, another one, and so Stan was a flower essence that was created to restore the fight, to restore our ability to hold the integrity of ourselves and to stand in our power and to not back down. A lot of the flower essences in the blend are about how do you hold the integrity of yourself while facing opposition from the other, which is, of course, applicable on a social level, but also in our personal lives, in our relationships, in our workspaces. Where are the places where we back down or want to back down or feel depressed because we can't retreat in the way that we need to really restore the integrity of the self? And so that's what we're going to be looking at this cycle through the flower essence work, and using this this flower essence and this moment as an opportunity to examine our own privilege and how we are taking a stand for the world at this really critical time. You could really say that every time is a critical time. But at this moment where so much of the world and humanity is calling for us to stand for something. And so we're going to be looking at different kinds of privilege and how we can use that privilege in the world.
I want to hear more about that. What kinds of privilege are you talking about? Because privilege does tap into like the royalty of Leo, right?
Yeah.
And then when we're talking about margins, we're talking about people who either are not aware of having that privilege or who actually don't have those privileges. So what do you mean by privilege?
Even our notion of privilege as being something fixed and something that is exclusive to thinking about race, gender, and sexuality and economics, right? So one thing that we're going to be doing is looking at the scale of all of these different areas to what extent do I have privilege in these areas or not? So that's the first thing. And one end of the spectrum is I don't even have to think about this aspect of my existence. So that would mean that I have, you know, if I don't have to think about it, if it doesn't confront me anywhere, then I probably have a lot of privilege there. For myself, I am heterosexual, so I don't have to necessarily think about, or it just kind of goes off my radar when I see a man and a woman kissing in an advertisement. But if I'm not heterosexual, that might be something that I'm like, I feel excluded or in the margins of or left out of. Our privilege varies from area to area of our life. Two areas that I want us to think about in addition to the big ones, race, sex, gender, economy, money, but also thinking about academic privilege. You know, did I have access to quality education? Was it kind of a given or norm to have access to literacy, to know how to read, to go to college, those kinds of things? So with a certain level of academic privilege, I might be able to navigate or speak in places that someone without that access might not be able to. Another big area would be spiritual privilege. So do I have access to ancestors and resources? I'm reading this really great book called Children of Virtue and Vengeance. And it's a sequel to Children of Blood and Bone. But what we see in it is that there's a group of people who are at the margins, who are the neglected ones, that are the oppressed ones, but they have this tremendous spiritual energy that they're able to wield in the world. And I think it's a terrific metaphor for many of us who have access, whether it's an ability to listen to an inner voice or an inner knowing, or to create the space for our ancestors to go out and make some things happen for us, that is a level of privilege that not everyone has access to. So how am I using that privilege in different spaces? And so this cycle really looking at where are the assets and the gifts and the things that I take for granted that I can also use for the service of myself at the center, but also for bringing the periphery to the center and make sure that all of us as a whole have access to our birthright and the best that the world has to offer.
So for instance, the parallel that I talk about frequently enough on Twitter is Black male privilege, which a lot of Black men don't acknowledge, but I definitely have seen it. I've experienced it. I have it, you know, and it's very simple. You know, I'm always someone who kind of cuts to the quick and say, I just ask people a question like, oh, okay, so when do we have like a Black woman head the NAACP, right? You know, or Black organizations. I think Southern Baptist churches still can't have Black women ministers, or I should say Black women ministers.
And I think you're bringing up something that's really important as we think about intersectionality, and that, again, it's not, our privilege isn't fixed. So you may have Black male privilege in some spaces, and in other spaces, none whatsoever, you know? And so it's really being able to look at and see within ourselves where are the places where I do have privilege. And really the most important part of it is like, how am I using my privilege to benefit the whole, to benefit the collective, which I think is ultimately what Aquarius is asking of us.
And I think it's the Leo Aquarius dynamic, which, you know, I have talked about as the circuit of giving love. And so it's the idea of giving and receiving. It is standing enough in your square, standing enough in your power to be able to see yourself as a conduit of that power rather than the source.
Like when we look at Aquarius, it's those little waves.
Yeah.
Conduit.
Literally. You know, it's kind of then, you know, Aquarius reminds us that we are conducting that power. And then Leo is kind of like to tap into the source. There's a dynamic. One thing that's highlighted is just in between the two presidents. Barack Obama is a Leo sun with Aquarius rising, whereas our current president is a sun in Gemini, but Leo rising.
I think what you're saying about the two presidents and how they represent that polarity also gives us an opportunity to see these two very iconic, archetypal, if you will, characters as representations of an inner dynamic within ourselves. So you were saying people should remember this for
the new moon, January 24th, and then for the full moon on the 8th of February.
And then we should all take the insights that we gain from the kairos of those lunar moons and bring it with us into the rest of our life. Well, I'm excited. I'm excited about this cycle to delve into these pretty vulnerable parts of looking at where we stand and where we stand in society. And also, you know, to push through the either apathy or the discouragement or the fear around looking at our society politically and really asking ourselves, well, what can I do?
It's recognizing that what's on the margins doesn't have to be there and what's in the center doesn't have to be there, and being grateful for both.
Well, I'm grateful for you.
Thank you, and I'm grateful for you.
And I'm grateful for everyone who listened in. And if you want more, you can check out Sam on
Unlockastrology.com.
And you can find me at Oceans and Rivers on all the platforms. And also you can check out my website if you are interested in ordering stand and learning how you can take a stand in your life and in the world. Please find me at oceansandrivers.com and we will get this party started. So thanks so much and talk soon.